Okay, so good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. Okay, to directly goes to the questions. What does theology do? Actually, I will directly give you the background. I asked this question in the Philippine context, especially now we have this crazy president. But of course, most of the Filipinos are in favor of this kind of style of provincial political style of our president now. They said he's the original Trump prior to Trump. So this is the title of my paper. So please, perhaps I'm going to integrate later this issue in the context of my perhaps future project in the PhD, which is the Oneness Pentecostal movement in the Philippines. So this title will be basically reflected later on. So now this is the contextualizing the need to ask these questions is to also at the same time to contextualize the questions in the Philippine context. Okay, the need for Philippine Christianities and the public life. So basically, the Philippines, we are the ICC, the International Court of Justice. They said allegedly there are, I think, 12,000 victims of extrajudicial killings in the Philippines. That is allegedly. But now it's, since I think most of the cabinet now, I think the president, our president is going to continue this public policy against the drug addicts in the Philippines. So I asked these questions: what does theology do? Specifically in the context of the Philippines, that we have this mad president. At the same time, the Philippines, we have this sharp gap, wide and deep gap between rich and poor. It's obvious in the Philippines. And then another thing is, of course, the colonial wound in the Philippines. It's hard to discuss doing theology in the Philippines without looking back to the colonial wound in the Philippines. You have the previous picture. The first picture is about when the Spanish came to the Philippines. And you have this newspaper published, I think, in Chicago. News, something like that. You have this messianic complex from the American conquest of colonialists during that time. So this is basically the questions now. I would like to ask this question from this context. Since I only have 10 minutes, I will just, go straight. The dominant way of doing theology in the Philippines to answer these questions is by adopting the most popular theological method in the Philippines, which is used by Catholic, mainline Protestant theologians, and now evangelical and Pentecostal theologians. So you have these faith expressions, the dynamics, we call it the creative tension between the faith expression, the scripture and traditions, and you have the human situation, the political, economic, social, cultural situations in the Philippines. Now, mapping the theological context in the Philippine scenes, we have the three, according to a Filipino Catholic scholar who graduated from the Leuven, Catholic University of Leuven, there are three main theological approaches, dominant theological approaches in the Philippines. First is they start doing theology by prioritizing the dogma, the scripture, and the rest, which is basically, this is the classical way of doing theology and answering this kind of question. Then second, you have the cultural linguistic approach in theology in the Philippines. But now we have the two third world Marxist analysis and praxis post-colonial, decolonial approach now in the Philippines. I'm part of this decolonial project in the Philippines. We are trying to look, because I think most of the Filipino theologians now are discontented with this post-colonial approach. So we do this decolonial project now in the Philippines. So basically, to answer these questions in the Philippine context, we basically resort to these three major approaches now. So you have this, the Marxist, which is basically common to the Filipino liberation theology movements in the Philippines. Because they find that the dogma, the first one and the second one, it's a kind of compromise in the Philippines. They talk about identity, they talk about culture, the problem of culture, they talk about, the concept, the language, the theological discourse, but they failed to address the political, social crisis in the Philippines. So most of them, they resort to post-colonial and decolonial context in the Philippines to reflect on this question, how Filipinos should do theology in the Philippines. So basically that is the response, the common, dominant, major response in the Philippines when it comes to address the question, what does theology do actually? So perhaps you can ask questions later on, and I can give you specific details on these regards. So thank you very much.